little business in terms of, number one, restrooms. If you don't know where they are, they're located on the aisle in the hallway to my right. Also remind you that if you agree to participate in lunch, if you would make sure that you put your money in the envelope so that someone can come by and pick that up. And then also, in reference to speaking, your mics currently are off, so when you speak, make sure you turn them on, and when you're through speaking, if you would just turn them off as well. And then we are going to have some guests on the telephone, and for the telephone members, if you will make sure to put your phone on mute, that would prevent us from hearing any background noise at your locations. So I also want to take the opportunity to introduce our new members to the committee. And I'm not sure if you're here or not, but our very first member is from the community colleges is Brett Caldwell. Welcome. And then we have Samuel Echevarria Cruz, here from Austin Community College. Brett is from Temple College. We also have Jonda Holcomb, who is with us from Delmar College. Welcome. Catherine Howard, I believe you are on the phone. Catherine?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
All right, great. Catherine is from Texarkana College. Then we have Ramin Malik Howard. Did I pronounce that correct? Welcome. And he is from El Centro College, Dallas County Community College District. We have Amber Kelly. Amber is with us from Howard College. And then Joshua Villalobos is not with us, but he is from El Paso Community College District. Our new members from the universities are Paul Bernasani. Did I pronounce that correctly? Welcome. He is from Lamar University. Nita Butte-Queen is from Texas Southern University and is not here today. However, she has a representative, Dr. Kerry Wentz from Texas Southern. Welcome. Also, we have Ricky Dobbs. Ricky, welcome, from Texas A&M University of Commerce. We have Elizabeth Earhart. And we have Juan Garcia and Mark Hartlem. Welcome, Mark. Lisa Latcher, a new member from University of Houston Clear Lake. And then we have Ashley Bergeson. Ashley, I believe you're on the phone as well. Ashley? Okay, she's from UT Arlington. So,
she may join us later.
Okay. And then we have Tammy Wyatt, who is from University of Texas at San Antonio, who is absent, will not be joining us today. All right, so, and then we have an ex officio member, John Spencer. John, are you with us? Oh, I'm sorry, John, didn't see you there. And then we have coordinating board staff, which is Rebecca Leslie to my left, and then James Coleman to my right. Thank you for being here. I think that I call all the members, but let me just go back and just tell you who the new members are. They are Samuel, Jonda, and Joshua. From the community colleges, from the universities, it's Nita Butte-Queen and Lisa Latcher. So welcome to the new members. So then moving on to item number 2. If you notice, there is an empty chair to my right because there is a need for a co-chair. And the Typically, the way the committee is run is that one of the chairs represents the community colleges and the second chair represents the universities. So we need a university representative. And so if you look at your agenda, it tells you a little bit about the election in terms of choosing a chair. And so typically what we like to do is ask if we have a volunteer that would like to serve as the chair, as the co-chair. So is there a volunteer at this point that would like to assist in being the co-chair? Basically, it's just a working, it's sort of, we divide the agenda. We co-chair the agenda. And of course, it would be great if you could make both meetings each academic year. And then the only other meeting that would be required is when the annual board of the coordinating board meets, we provide a report in terms of what we accomplish as a committee. So that would be the only additional requirement if you agree to serve in this capacity. So volunteers, anyone? I'm sorry?
Does it require prior?
Not necessarily. Rebecca?
I would like to say that generally, I would like to have someone who has a year of experience kind of to understand the processes. That isn't always the case. You might have had experience on maybe a learning outcome committee or a field of study committee and kind of know what we do a little bit. But generally, we've tried to get someone with experience to know what this committee does. So when you look at that list on the back of the agenda item, those are the possible nominees, and the information out to the side indicates how much longer they have to serve. These are usually 3-year terms. We do occasionally reappoint someone to the committee. Depends on the balance of institutions. But so these are the people you can nominate. You might take the approach that the best way not to get nominated yourself is to nominate someone else. But I would be happy for someone who would be interested in doing this. Okay, Paul has volunteered.
Who is?
Paul.
Okay, Paul. Okay, any other volunteers? All right, so being none, then we shall vote. All those in favor of Paul serving as the co-chair, if you would raise your hand to indicate. I believe that is just about everybody that is a voting member. So, Paul, congratulations, you're now the co-chair. And so I welcome you to come sit at the front.
Got all his electronics.
Well, you can, why don't we just do this after? Yeah. Okay, that way you've already settled in, so I don't want to have to move you. All right, so congratulations, we now have a co-chair. Okay, so then our next item is to review the minutes of our last meeting and to approve those minutes. So I believe that most of you received the minutes ahead of time. So do you need a few minutes to look at those again, or are we ready to vote at this point? Okay, I'll give you a few minutes to just go back and briefly review them. Okay, can I have a motion to approve the meetings as submitted? Do I have a second? One.
I'll second.
Right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, minutes approved. Our next agenda item is agenda item regarding the Phyllis study and voluntary transfer compact courses. So what you have in front of you on starting on page 9, all the rules and statutes related to that. So if you would take a few minutes just to read that. I think the most important thing is the rule, which is on the middle of the page, Rule 9.71C4. And then the statutes follow that. So I'm just going to read what I want you to keep in mind as we go to the next agenda item. Courses in a board-approved field of study curriculum as outlined under Rule 4.32 of this title relating to field of study curriculum or a statewide transfer compact shall automatically be added to the ACGM. Rebecca, do you want to add something to that?
Yes, the reason I put this in here was because of an item that we had last spring, and we weren't clear on exactly what we can and cannot do with certain courses during our annual review of enrollments. So we wanted to get clarification. And what we found is that FOS courses, field of study courses, and voluntary transfer compacts courses have gone into the ACGM without the necessity of approval of this committee. The difference that distinguishes the two is that the field of study is mandated in statute, not just in rules, but in statute. So those are somewhat protected from just this committee. They have to be referred back to the field of study committee. But the voluntary statewide compacts, which were before this last round of field of study revisions, were kind of that, they were, as the word says, voluntary. They were not protected in statute. They were not mandated. So although they would be put in there, there's no protection that this committee can't make adjustments on their own without referral to a secondary committee. So that's a little bit of a difference there that we needed to be aware of and kind of ferret that out in the rules and the statute before we proceeded. So are there any questions about what's in rules concerning this?
Okay, there being no questions, then we'll move on to item number 5, which is the actual discussion regarding the course in question. So item 5 is the discussion and consideration of the recommendation to schedule engineering 2334, chemical engineering, thermodynamics 1 for deletion. Okay, this was the item that we pulled from our last meeting. because we need a clarification on the rules that we just read. And so at this point, there's consideration as to whether we should delete this course from the ACGM.
Right.
And you see there's some data that's provided to you regarding the course as has been offered for the past 4 years. John, I think you have a comment?
Yes, I would like to say that we should not delete this course from the ACGM. You know, some of the community colleges have just started the 2-year chemical engineering programs, and I think we're just getting started, and it's essential. And I know that the voluntary transfer agreement isn't something that's mandated, but I think it shows that it was a course that other universities would partner with community colleges. And we do have a lot of universities that did agree to accept that thermodynamics course. Plus, you know, it's very limiting offering a 2-year transfer in chemical engineering, and yet we're restricted with the number of chemical engineering courses that are even in the ACGM. There'd be, I believe, only one other one. And I think this is critical to keep this course. Thank you.
Any other comments from any other members? We do have some background data on the course. I'm going to ask Rebecca if she could go ahead and give us some additional information in terms of some specifics in terms of the course being used by universities as well as enrollments with community colleges. Rebecca?
Okay, so I did research. There's only 9 universities that have a chemical engineering program, so your possibility of transfer is limited. You know, it's not like English 1301. So you start out with that kind of numbers. And 2 of those universities came on board with the degree program relatively recently, and I don't have enrollment numbers for them, but they're all of the others, the other 7, are healthy programs. They're growing, they're doing well. They're at regional universities. Lamar has a chemical engineering. Prairie View has a chemical engineering. Kingsville has a chemical engineering, but as well as A&M and UT and University of Houston and Texas Tech. So you have a good representation. You have your flagships, you have your emerging research, and then you have some regionals with strong programs within those few institutions. And like I said, the enrollments or the amount of graduates is healthy. With, of course, A&M and UT producing the most, over 100, between 100 and 200 at both of those each year. So those are the largest programs. In terms of overall transfer, community college transfer students, A&M probably has more than UT. I don't know for this particular program, but generally as the transfer report that I work on every year shows, UT doesn't get as many transfer students as A&M. So A&M is your bigger transfer school, but University of Houston is probably the biggest transfer school in the state. So their program may not have as many graduates, but they get a lot of transfer students. So there's kind of a mix that you need to consider there too. Then when I went and looked at these, I looked at program inventories for universities, I found that of these 9 institutions, because UT San Antonio and UTPB are the new ones, of the 9 universities, 5, teach it at the sophomore level, and 4, teach it at the junior level. So it's a real marginal course as to where it fits in their curriculum. Lamar teaches it at the lower division, Prairie View, A&M, Texas Tech, U of H. They all teach it at the sophomore level. So these are some numbers to consider. There's not really a right or wrong on this. We're just looking for guidance, and thought you needed to be aware of not every course is English 1301. and you're going to have a limited transfer pattern for this very specialized course. But at the same time, there's growth, and there's a widespread statewide of these programs.
And also, go ahead.
I wanted
John.
to mention also that, billions of dollars of industry has been moving into Texas, and I think that you're going to see more growth with chemical engineering over the next few years. I know some other universities are trying to develop chemical engineering. I'd like to give this course another year or two to really see what it can do. And so I hope you'll consider that, because there is a lot of growth, especially in South Texas in our port industry. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, I want to say that considering we have some institutions that are teaching it at the sophomore level, we should go ahead and keep it so that we can get the transferability and people have choices. Otherwise, they may get there and then have to take that at a junior or senior level, and I just think that that's closing some opportunities. So I think we should leave it for now, also based on the fact that it may not be a lot of institutions teaching it, but it's also one of those courses that, down on the coast and out in West Texas, we're going to see more institutions having it. Where I am, there's no petroleum industry at all. So I think we should keep it.
All right, just keep in mind that it didn't make it into the Phyllis study for chemical engineering. It is not one of those courses. So, again, any other comments before we decide to go ahead and vote? James?
Yeah, I would just like to amplify the comment that Norma just made. As you can see in your materials, as recently as 2017, we had a engineering field of study committee. They chose not to put this course in. Now, what that means is, if students take this course and they show up at one of these 9 universities that have chemical engineering, there's no guarantee that this course will be applied toward their degree. None at all, because it's not part of the field of study. That's something to keep in mind as well.
James, do you know, with the field of study, because it is just a generic, broad engineering field of study?
It has tracks.
It has tracks?
It has
And
tracks.
so that chemical, did y'all list those in our minutes? Because y'all listed them out, but I didn't y'all?
The field of study?
Yeah. Or did I just go look at it online a while ago?
We didn't list the courses. We listed the degree programs.
Okay.
And chemical engineering is one of the degree programs.
I know chemical engineering and civil engineering have thermodynamics, and so did another thermodynamic course get into the field of study? These are required courses, so by the actual 9 schools.
And I think that was something I observed too. I just looked at the schools that had the chemical engineering degree, but when I was looking at inventories, I saw it where it would carry in mechanical engineering rubric. So it's showing up in mechanical engineering, some thermodynamics courses. I didn't check the numbers on that one. So I don't know how it would fit into those, and I didn't check if those were lower division or upper division. I just looked at the programs that were, because that's how the field of study is built as well. And I think the issue of that guarantee with the field of study is something that will be an evolving and something that we'll have to be kind of sensitive to as things go forward. I don't think we have enough track record in any of these so far to really identify how well they're doing. Because we're not getting or don't have the reporting capabilities right now. We're going toward that. And also, they're so new, we don't have maybe 1 year at the most on this one. So.
Any other comments before I call for a vote?
I had one comment. Looking at the Texas tuning project, no universities are listed, at least online, as voluntary transfer compact for chemical engineering. So I guess it begs the question, yes, there are students taking it, but exactly what's happening to those students would be good to know, because was there any rationale as to why it wasn't included by the Field of Study Committee that anyone can recall? There are only 2 chemical engineering courses in the ICGM, and they picked one. So,
What we can do is, when we take a little break, I can go up and talk to Dr. Alan Mickey, who's been running the Field of Study efforts for us. And if there was specific discussion of this course, there's a good chance that he would have heard that and he could share it with us.
Mindy did this one.
Okay, so does the committee want some additional information before I call for a vote? Okay, so we'll put this on hold and come back to it after lunch. All right. All right, so let's move on to agenda item number 6. And this is a discussion item only. It's the report on research and discussion of a rubric change for speech courses. So at this point, as a committee, we are responsible for overseeing the courses, the ACGM. But there is one item that is not specifically outlined in terms of what our responsibilities involve, and that's the process of changing a rubric. That is not, there is no process for doing that, and so that's why this is being put on here as a discussion. Because there has been a request made by one of our institutions to change a rubric for speech to another rubric. And so here is just information for you to look at and consider, but we're not going to vote on it. And so what I'd like to do is just have a discussion in reference to what you're looking at, what additional information might be needed. I know we have John that's here that conducted a survey. You can give us a little summary on that if you'd like. Also thinking about if we decide that we do want to change that, vote for changing that, what should that rubric be? Having reviewed the material myself, the one thing that I would have liked to have seen that's not in here is a statement from the Texas Speech Communication Association. There's reference has been made to it in the letter by the institution, but there's no comment from that entity in terms of what their perceptions are in terms of removing the rubric of SPCH or speech. So that's the one thing I wanted to point out. So let me go ahead and ask John to give us his input in terms of the survey that he conducted, and then I'll open up for discussion. John?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, at the end of April's meeting, I was asked to put a survey out just on the TACRO listserv. I did get a little lighter response than I would have been hoping for, but I had 20 people respond. And We also mentioned this in discussions at our TACRO session for the Common Course Numbering System. And our feedback in that group, as well as what we represented when we put our survey out on the listserv, even though it's just a sampling, there was a resounding kind of not perceived as a need to change this rubric. And I think a lot of people felt like it would be a significant overhaul of everybody's programs, their catalogs, there's adjustment to degrees and those kinds of things. So 78%, nearly 80, were saying that we didn't need to change it. We asked people, would these cause problems? The majority of people thought that it would. Would it be, beneficial? Our Likert scale really was, 5 being absolutely beneficial and 1 not being, and people did not see that. I did record the responses that people were able to type into freeform there. And along with these responses, though, I did get a few phone calls from people just going, hey, what are y'all doing? And, it was like, we're doing nothing. We are merely gathering information to have a discussion. I said, there's not a plan to vote on anything at this. This is just, information. So, you might want to go out there and fill that in and respond it. But the people that reached out to me and called were all opposed to making a rubric change. But everybody that called me was a registrar. I mean, and we kind of look at what's in our system and going, not that we're not a happy to embrace change bunch, but we tend to be a little more rigid about that kind of stuff. But I'd be happy to answer questions if y'all have them. They're there, and to me, the responses came back and lined out the things that I thought. People spoke about some things that I thought were interesting compared to the letter that we got from Dallas County, and that was that they thought that it would cause less confusion to make the change, and people that respond to the survey actually said, I think that's going to make it harder for people to know what's coming in. Is it a communications course? Is it a speech course? And that kind of line doesn't need to get blurred, was our response. So,
John, I'd like to see you resend the survey, but to send it to some academic folks and some student services folks who actually do work with our students, and see what kind of response we get from them, because I do know that typically registrars would like always to keep everything the same without making too many changes. So I'd like to hear from the academic side of the house.
right.
So, John, I know that you keep that contact list and that there's an institutional kind of an academic person, and then you have your registrars and admissions folks as your student reps. So if we could hear from both of those, it's a limited pool, but it'd be about 100, maybe 150 individuals.
And we've got the survey, and we'll add some questions to it to identify whether or not you're at a 2-year or a 4-year, a private or a public, and your side of the house you're on, whether you're on that academic side or the administrative side. I think would help give some, I wish in hindsight, I had thought to capture that even in the respondents that we got. And so we'll definitely add that. And I would like to say too, that I would really like to see what the actual TSCA, TSCA had to say on their thoughts on this as well.
Right.
But yeah, I will do that. And do y'all want that? And I can give it to Rebecca as soon as it's here, and we could distribute it well even before our next spring meeting for people to have.
That would be great if you could do that. And then, Rebecca, can you reach out to the association?
Yes, I can reach out to them and their leadership and ask them to do hold their membership. We'll be happy to do that. I agree. I think we need to hear from them as well.
Okay. Any other comments or any other information that the committee would need in order to make a decision at our next meeting?
One of the things I was interested in is there any sort of cost-benefit analysis? Because some people are saying it would increase the number of students taking these courses, and other people are concerned with the cost of changing it. They change these things, catalogs every year. I just don't know if you don't have a cost-benefit analysis, how can you really determine if it would be that difficult of a change to make, or if it should be considered or not? I don't know if that's possible, but I'm just throwing it out there to be thought of.
Yeah, I think a lot of the work that they're maybe referring to are man-hours. It's the changing of degrees, all degree plans that have that. And
Right, if you do how many man-hours, how much it would cost, you'd get it. Dollars versus it's more students. I just, if that's possible to get those kinds of numbers, there's cost benefit analysis to make sure would be something that could be collected.
okay, we'll see what we can do to get that data.
Just to comment on that, part of the difficulty of this is that the benefits are largely speculative, right? Oh, because I've read through a bunch of these comments in the paper from Dallas, and it basically says, if we change this, they will come, right? And that's speculative. It may be very well true, but we don't know. There's no way to certify that. I think the costs are probably much more concrete and maybe more easily calculated. The problem is we have 50 community college districts, 38 public universities. Each of those has a different student information system, a different system of updating their catalogs. They're very different, greatly differing in size and how many people they employ. So coming up with a uniform cost estimate would be very difficult. And we would impose costs if we went around and asked every single institution, hey, come up with a cost for us. Well, we'd actually be incurring costs by doing that because they'd have to spend man-hours to make that estimate.
Right.
That's the challenge of this. No, it's a good idea. The problem is that there's not as much uniformity amongst our institutions as there often is in the private sector.
Because if you take a look at page 18, page 18 on your agenda, I think that's 18. You notice even with the four-year institutions, if you look at that, even they use different rubrics for their courses.
Yes, I compiled the rubrics, and I based it on the one course, public speaking, and I looked at what they're reporting, and also if they weren't reporting an equivalent, I could look in their catalog to see what rubric they're using. So there's while COMM is used most often, there are variations of COMM, and there's variations of speech as well. And this is just for the universities. We didn't include the community colleges because they all already use SPCH. All community colleges use SPCH, so it's not for them, all of them would have to change. There would only be a handful of universities who would only change their degree guides or their equivalencies. And even those who have converted to the common numbering system, some of them use COMM, which can lead to problems because there's some overlap in the course numbers in the system. And then others will go ahead and use the SPCH. So there's not a real consistent pattern here that we can even look at. But the only reason you don't have a community colleges chart like this is because they all use SPCH right now.
I'd also like to add that, the overlap in numbers is kind of the real problem here, because the obvious solution at first glance is just, oh, well, let's just cross-list everything. That way you can list it as speech or as comm, but that won't work because there's too many numbers. We wouldn't be able to reconcile the numbers.
Also, as additional information, if you look on the next page, you also have the enrollments of all the speech courses for both the community colleges and the universities. So is there any more discussion on the topic, or any additional information that the council may need at this point, or may desire?
I think that's what we're doing now is asking you, what else do we need to consider? What else do we need to research? So if you have ideas about that we can pursue in the interim between now and the spring meeting, that would be helpful.
One thing I'm curious about is, in many universities at least, speech is required. And if it's, I wonder how many instances it's required, because if it's required, they don't have to really sell it. You just have. I'm curious if it's already required anyway, for many universities, then. But I just am curious.
And we can get that. That's you're raising a good issue because of core. Sometimes it's required in core, and how it's required in core. So we could get, those are numbers that we could get easily. And I think that would add to the conversation as well. So we'll look at that. Because the new core came in 2014, the fall of 2014. So those numbers, and actually there was a little tweak to whether or not how oral communication fits into core. There's more discretion at the institutional level. So there was maybe a decline in some courses enrollments, but those are issues that this committee doesn't control, that we can't force them to put speech courses in core. But we can certainly see how many do at both community colleges and universities. So we'll add that to the list of things that we'll.
Folks, just a housekeeping note. I got a little hand signal from our person that's running the control booth in the back, and I think some of us are not pulling our mics up close enough, because I got a "we can't hear you" sort of signal. So just be sure when you hit your button that you are close enough that you can speak into the mic well.
I think for me, the case that Dallas makes that should be the most powerful is that there's a merging of these two fields, but they list 3 examples of that possible merging, only 3 out of 38 at university level. So to me, there's still 2 distinct disciplines. If we've already worked out the nomenclature, the rubric, everything is humming. We have 5 speech courses in our core. They're very popular. They're hard-coded into most of the liberal arts associate degrees as part of not just communication, but as almost like an effective learning type of experience. So in that sense, unless there was wholesale disciplinary merger where these 2 courses need to be thought of more closely and a rubric change makes sense, I don't really see a rationale, especially given the cost. So, you know, that you're right, there's a lot of hope here, and I'm a guided pathways person. I understand that we're trying to minimize confusion, but speech is one of those courses that is pretty widely known as a not just as a core course, but as a course that many students enjoy taking or fits into many of their flexible schedules, degree programs, et cetera.
In response to that observation about the information that the Dallas County provided, I asked them if they could provide more departments that had been merged, and they didn't really have time to do some research on that, but that would be, we could go back to them and ask them. There may be more than just these 3. I think these were examples. So I don't know. And sometimes it's hard to identify whether or not those departments have been merged. I mean, you have to dig into the catalogs pretty deeply to see that. But that may be another element that we want to research more.
Can I ask a question? is this really about a title change or a prefix change?
It's the prefix.
But they're saying, I mean, I'm kind of looking at it, and I didn't read the whole thing, but they're really talking about public speaking, people being afraid to take public speaking or intimidated of taking public speaking. And just changing it from SPCH to COMM, I mean, it's still the same class. You know, they could change it to principles of speech instead of calling it public speaking. I mean, do we really need to change the prefix for that? Or could we just change the title to something else?
You know, and in gathering research for this too, and Rebecca, James, maybe y'all know too, but does the state keep a record of institutional prerequisites on core courses? Yeah. You know, because it is one of those things that vary, and so let me just speak neighbor to neighbor, Dallas and Tarrant. We see this all the time, is that speech at Dallas County Community College District has a prerequisite of being college ready in reading and writing. You have to be TSI Med in reading and TSI Med in writing to take speech. At the little school to the west, there is no college level requirement as a prereq for speech. And so there are a lot of students, because we see these, especially right there in that border kind of area, that will come to Tarrant to take speech and transfer it back to Dallas, where they miraculously become met in reading and writing. Now, right, that should make us all feel a little wormy, like right here above our belts. But that is, I know that is not the only place throughout the state where those kinds of moves are made by students, because we have this variance in what it takes to get into a course, especially the core. So I don't want to chase a rabbit too far, but I do want to say that I think the title change could be addressed to make it a little less threatening for students. But I think some discussion needs to be made too, to say, what does it take to qualify for that, you know, class? And I know that when we submit things to the core, we have to say what they will meet all those objectives. And Dallas apparently thinks that there's a college level writing and a college level reading learning outcomes that you have to attain to be ready for, you know, for that course. But I don't know that that's true across the state either. And that would be interesting things to look at as well too, considering that it's a course, like other people have said, that it shows up in most degree plans across the state, especially, I know, in people's associates. So.
Thank you for those comments. Additional information that committee members might need?
It does make sense I mean, in my mind, it makes sense for students to have to be TSI Met in reading and writing to take speech. Reason being is that in order to read a speech, you need to know how to read, and also you usually write the speech first before you. So it does make sense that they should be TSI Met.
We're not questioning the validity of that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's not mandated.
Right.
I mean, that's an institutional prerogative.
Staffed the Engineering Field Study Committee. She can address the next course.
All right, we'll go back to that. Okay, do we have enough information now or enough discussion to gather enough information for us to have at our next meeting to make a decision? Does anyone want to add anything else before we move on to the next item?
I would just add that I noticed that in some of the responses that John got, there were discussions of man hours and what kind of effort it might take. And I think in light of Lisa's comment, we should take particular note of those kinds of comments, because, you know, there's the decision of, hey, is this sort of academically the right thing to do or not? But then there's also the question of, okay, economically, what's the impact of this going to be as well? And those are both important questions. Thanks.
Especially when budgets are rather tight.
One question. Is this the first time this rubric change request has ever come to the ACGM committee?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
The summary.
All right, so did you want to prize the summary? Rebecca, you want to prize the summary, or?
Well, I just want to make sure that I understand what we're going to bring next time. We're going to, TCC&S is going to do another survey looking to get their academic contacts and their student contacts to be responsive. And maybe by having it to a pointed audience. Then we're going to look at how speech is used in core. Other thing that we're going to research is maybe merging departments. I'll see what I can find out about how many departments at institution. Do you think it needs to be just universities, or does it need to be at the community college level too? I'm not sure. There's more community colleges. Get a sampling, see if I can see, not necessarily how they're, if they merged recently, but how they're structured. That may be an easier thing, okay? Both at universities. And then also we want to hear a statement from the Texas Association of Speech Communication. So those are the things that we're going to try to pull together to flesh this out a little bit more. Okay.
That's correct, that's all the notes I have. Have we missed anything? Okay, I think that should cover it. All right, so we'll pick this up at our next meeting to further discussion and maybe a possible vote. I want to go ahead and go back to the last agenda item, the one that we put on hold, the engineering, 2334. We do have the representative that worked with the Phyllis study for chemical engineering, Mindy. And so there was a question earlier in reference to why this course was not added to the Phyllis study for chemical engineering. Can you shed some light on that for the committee?
Ms. Perez, I can report to you from the minutes of the Chemical Engineering Advisory Subcommittee and from and its recommendations, and from the main committee's final resolution of what to include in the chemical engineering field of study. Okay. The main committee, the engineering field of study, formed 4 advisory subcommittees for disciplinary track majors, one of them being chemical engineering. That subcommittee recommended the inclusion of 4 engineering courses in a chemical engineering field of study, one of them being Engineering 2334. So it came out of the advisory subcommittee as a recommendation. The subcommittee was chaired by, FYI, 2 members of the engineering field of study main committee, and filled out with members from the discipline around the state. Engineering 2334, Chemical Engineering Thermodynamics 1 came as a recommendation. At its April 29, 2016 meeting, the Engineering Field of Study Committee had a discussion of these recommended tracks. And for chemical engineering, the faculty member from UT Austin noted that the university had substantive issues with all 4 of the engineering courses that were recommended. The dissension with regard to Engineering 2334 is that it was an upper division course at the university, and the content, as noted in the ACGM, didn't provide sufficient course content to meet that upper division requirement. Later in that same meeting, the motion was made to adopt the chemical engineering field of study as recommended by the subcommittee with the omission of engineering 1201, 2304, and 2334. So in the motion made to adopt the chemical engineering field of study, 2304 was specifically omitted. The motion was seconded. In the discussion that ensued, there were no objections to the omission of this particular course. Discussion centered on whether to include Chemistry 1411, and that was pretty much it. The vote for adoption of the field of study as it came to be was 17 in favor and 2 against with no abstentions. So that's the history.
And so when it went out to comment from the general, all the other institutions, anything come back in reference to those comments?
I did not look back at the comments. I can go upstairs, check those, and if it would be okay, I can provide written follow-up, or I can come back downstairs, whichever would be preferable.
Well, I'll ask the committee, are you guys interested in hearing what, any comments that came back in reference to that recommendation?
Okay, let me go up and look at that. Would you like for me to just come back down?
Yeah, go ahead and go on up, and we'll go ahead and go on to the next agenda
All right.
item, but if you'll come back,
I'll
we
be
would
back in a
appreciate
few
that.
minutes.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item number 7. And item number 7 deals with the discussion and consideration of changes to Accounting 2301, 2304, Principles of Financial Accounting in regard to the prerequisite of TSI standing. And so we have Dr. Suzanne Morales Vell that will present information about the TSI-related prerequisite. Suzanne?
So we had a question from the field. An institution was doing a scan of the ACGM, and they noted that there were only 2 course descriptions that had any reference to TSI, one of them being the Accounting 2301. And we were a little bit concerned because, or the questioner was concerned because in the context of co-requisite model implementation as required by House Bill 2223, generally any reference to TSI can send a signal potentially to an institution that that course is subject to being employed through a co-requisite model, whereby an underprepared student is actually allowed to enroll in the course and will also be required to enroll in the related subject area developmental course or intervention. In this case, since mathematics is mentioned, it would be a mathematics course. And then the successful completion of that course then would mean the student is TSI met in mathematics. So given that context and the institutional focus on co-requisite models and ensuring they're meeting the requirements of the bill, we did not feel it was maybe necessary to include the mention of TSI college readiness.
Okay, so members, so what they're asking, if you look at the item for Accounting 2301, 2304, it has prerequisite, meet TSI, college readiness, and then there's a recommended co-requisite, which is Math 1324, and the confusion because we have implemented the co-requisite model in the community colleges in reference to the developmental courses, then it could be misleading in terms of that this course would also fall into that requirement.
And let me clarify, co-requisites are required at both community colleges and universities.
Thank you. I wasn't sure about that. Thank you for clarifying that. And so that's one of the main reasons that it's coming forward, for us to consider whether there's a need to restate that in terms of the in terms of a prerequisite. So the recommendation, if you read on there, is should it be changed to read concurrent enrollment instead of co-requisite? So we're looking at, number one, removing the prerequisite of TSI, and then instead adding the recommended concurrent enrollment of Math 2304 or its equivalent.
And again, just the recommendation to change the term co-requisite here to concurrent is again, in the context of House Bill 2223 implementation, co-requisite now means something very specific to institutions. And I think here the intent was either completion of the math course or whereby the student is enrolled in both at the same time, but not necessarily through a co-requisite model, that more strict definition.
Correct. So, the members, have any questions before I call for a vote?
So we would keep the TSI college readiness.
No, we would not.
And so it's a recommended and not an imposed concurrent enrollment. So that makes a big difference. That means somebody can go with very little limited math, and that's not necessarily good for the student.
Rebecca?
Okay. You're hitting right on the issues that we internally in our discussions fell upon too. We do need to get rid of the TSI, definitely, but that second part of that co-requisite, because this is a field of study for business, and that math course is also in the field of study. This was done during the tuning process, which was part of that voluntary transfer compacts. We've come up with the idea, we're not going to let recommended co-requisites get back in the ACGM. That recommended is meaningless. So we thought maybe this should go back to the field of study committee, since these are both field of study courses. So our consideration for change may be to make a motion to get the TSI off of there, because that's the main issue, but then refer that other prerequisite or
Concurrent.
Co-enrollment.
Pardon me, I can't say that. How the field of study committee sees this. So we could poll them, get some input, but the main thing is to take care of that first TSI issue, and then the second issue, because those recommended co-requisites are problematic. I get calls on it all the time. What does that mean? Well, that means that's what is best for the student, but you don't have to do it. You know, so it's absolutely, doesn't inform very well what needs to be done at the institution. So we're kind of got two issues with this prerequisite.
So at this point, then, we're looking at the first part, removing the TSI requirement. However, for the second part, we probably should refer this back to the business field of study to get their input before we make before we vote on a final change. All right, so we just we'll just do both items at the next meeting.
Or you could go ahead and do the
And then,
big of a problem.
Addressing or removing the TSI reference would address the question that originally came from the field from this institution.
okay.
The second component was not mentioned, although it did come up in review of this.
Depended upon each other.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so then let's vote on the first part, which is to remove the TSI prerequisite off of the ACGM related to accounting 2304 and 2301 and 2401. So we'll vote on that at this point. So all those in favor of removing, I'm sorry, Do I hear a motion to remove the TSI prerequisite from accounting 2301 and 2304? Do I have a motion? All right, we have a motion. Do I have a second? All right, have a second. All right, all those in favor of the removal of
Aye.
TSI?
I'm in favor.
All right. Anybody oppose? Okay, the motion passes. And then we will defer to the Phyllis study for business in reference to the second item, in reference to the removal of co-requisite, although we agree as a committee that that should be removed, that we go ahead and get input from the Phyllis study for business to determine if there's an issue, how they would like to see us make that statement for accounting 2301 and 2401. The second item also has to do with Suzanne, and that's item number 8. And this has to do with math 1324, basically the same thing. But Suzanne, you want to go ahead and add anything to that?
Yes, just for the sake of consistency, none of the other entry-level, college-level coursework have any mention of TSI prerequisites or requirements because it is a given that a student meet, or in the context of a co-requisite, that the student can be co-enrolled in these gateway courses. So for sake of consistency, and also just to reiterate that Math 1324 in TSI rule under the definition of entry-level coursework is listed there as an entry-level course.
Okay. Any questions, anyone, before I call for a vote? All right, do I have a motion to remove the TSI requirement off of the Math 1324, Mathematics for Business and Social Sciences? Do I have a second? All right, all those in favor of the removal of TSI from Math 1324, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All those in favor, the motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne. We're going to go ahead and break for lunch at this point. And so we have a 30 minutes.
30 minutes to 45 minutes. This is a new group, we might want to.
Okay, so we have, we'll break for about 30 to 45 minutes. Is 45 sound good? Since we have some new members and get to know some of the new members, might have some questions. So we'll break for 45 minutes. So we'll be back at 12:30. Thank you. He was here. Okay, we're going to go ahead and convene the meeting again. And so we're going to start by going back to the agenda item 5, which is the agenda item that we needed to get more information from Mindy, and she has provided that information. So I'm going to ask James to provide the input. The additional information we requested from Mindy was what kind of feedback was given when the Phyllis study for chemical engineering went out to all of the institutions for comment. And so we're waiting to hear what some of those comments were. So I'm going to turn it over to James to give us that information.
Okay, so when I talked to Mindy, she made it clear that there were 5 universities that made comments on the chemical engineering field of study, and that none of those comments were or related to a request to keep Engineering 2334 in the field of study curricula. So apparently there was not a call or you could say a sort of a dissenting minority of the institutions that were eager to keep this course.
Okay.
Any questions? Yes, John?
My understanding is with the field of study discussion, and I wish Mindy were back in here, but when they were discussing field of study, it was, well, we need to try to accommodate UT, and the thermodynamics became a concern for UT, and they thought it would benefit the student by going ahead with the field of study that they did approve, with the understanding that they would be able to offer thermodynamics on their degree plan beyond the core field of study that would be transferred to the university. And there are many already compacts with universities in which they will accept that thermodynamics course. And so I think, you know, from her saying that the subcommittee did, they wanted the thermodynamics, but then they acquiesced later, because my understanding is that UT really had a big issue, and they needed to benefit those many, many students. But like I said a minute ago, with the understanding that community colleges could continue to offer thermodynamics in their degree plans. That's my understanding. And like I said, I wish Mindy were here to verify that. But I did discuss that with somebody a long time ago and more recent that was on the field of study committee.
Any other comments from the committee or from any of the coordinating board representatives?
Yeah.
One more comment. I guess I'm not understanding why it's a bad thing to keep this course in the ACGM if it benefits the student, and we've already set up transfer agreements with universities. I just don't understand why that would be a bad thing to keep it in the ACGM.
Well, a lot of the reasons for when we moved to delete courses from the ACGM, it's because of underutilization of those courses. And so I believe that that was one of the reasons that this came up for review by the committee at the last committee meeting. And again, it was being recommended to delete. However, there were some concerns, and that's why it was put on hold until the next meeting, pending understanding what was really the rules and statute related to that particular course. So if we vote to delete the course at this point, the course remains active, I believe, for, is it 2 years? So it would not, we would vote to delete it now, but it would not become effective until fall of 2020? Is that correct? And so I wanted the committee to be aware of that as we move to make a vote. Rebecca, do you have something you want to add?
Yes, in response to what we do when we do that review, we look at how the rules are set up for a course to be included in the ACGM, and the specific charges to the committee in terms of reviewing courses for deletion. If a course is offered at only 3 community college, it has to be considered for deletion. That doesn't mean that this committee says it is deleted, but they do need to think about that and consider it for deletion. Then we also think in terms of how does a course get in the ACGM? Well, to get in the ACGM, it has to be taught at 5 community colleges, and there have to be 5 universities that accept it and apply it to a degree. So those are the kind of parameters that we work with when the committee is reviewing the courses.
I think the chemical engineering degree will be growing in the state of Texas, so I wish we could do a survey or study of institutions that would like to start a chemical engineering program and plus at the 2-year college, because I think they're just now getting started on the whole chemical engineering degree.
Rex, you want to make a comment?
Yeah, so I sort of vaguely remember a lot of discussion about thermodynamics in the engineering field of study. So I'll go back and see what other information we have about that. And so remember that, as Norma pointed out, even once you vote to delete something, it's still on the books for 2 years. And so if somewhere in that 2-year time period, the necessity to change that comes about, we could do that. But in the meantime, I'll go back and do a little bit of digging on that one. The engineering fields of study were one of the first ones we did, and it was a bit of a flawed process in the sense that we tried to do all of them at one time, and that proved not to be a good idea. But we did wind up with the 4, and what I found really interesting about it was that we actually wound up there because we then brought together subcommittees of mechanical, chemical, electrical, and civil together to look at these things, and they actually came to some pretty decent consensus about stuff that the then broader committee undid some of the consensus on, so to some extent. So they kind of wound up back in the same place they were at before. But I do remember a lot of discussion about thermodynamics. I don't remember all the details. So, but we'll go back and do some digging on that, and if it turns out, I mean, we've sort of already made the decision that, for example, mechanical engineering probably ought to be brought back fairly soon. We've committed ourselves to like a 5-year cycle on these things at most, so that the fields of study are reviewed every 5 years at a minimum. But if there's some reason that the field brings up to look at one sooner than that, then we'll do that. And we're working on putting that in rules and what have you. But that mechanism is there. And so I think mechanical is one that we've already decided probably should be brought back. And we'll take a look at this, and if we need to bring chemical back as well, we can do that. One quick comment about the growth in chemical engineering, which is kind of interesting. I think we had a proposal recently for a chemical engineering degree, and there was a very difficult time establishing any real workforce demand for it. Interestingly enough, yeah, which I found sort of interesting, but anyway, and of course that can change. 3 months from now, that could be very different. So.
Yeah, I guess I was referring to growth in, the coastal bend region with the port industry and a lot of companies, billions of dollars of industry coming in. And so, I can relook at the workforce need in that area as well. Thank you.
But we can work that out as we go along, so, okay.
Okay, are there any additional questions or comments? Because I'm going to go ahead and call for a vote. I'm sorry, first I need a motion. Do I hear a motion to delete Engineering 2334 from the ACGM? So no motion? Okay, Mark has made a motion to delete Engineering 2304 from the ACGM. Do I have a second? A second? All right, there is no second. So then the motion doesn't go anywhere. Motion fell. All right, so we will bring this back. Rebecca?
The course will be reviewed every year. So in the spring, we have an opportunity to look at this course again. I mean, all courses are reviewed in the spring, so this will be one of them.
So maybe Dr. Peebles will have some more information at that time. Thank you.
Make sure that we have some of that.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. So we are now go back on track on the agenda, and we are on item 9. And the rest of the agenda basically is reporting. So I'm going to ask Rebecca Leslie to give us an update or give us a report on the Learning Outcomes Project. Rebecca?
This summer, the Learning Outcome Project worked on courses that were recommended in fields of study, and there were 2 business courses and 3 social work courses and I think 4 psychology courses. This included some new courses. In the business field of study, they wanted to create a 2305 business statistics. And in psychology, the fields of study recommended 2320 abnormal psychology and 2330 biological psychology in the fields of study. So this is a response to the activity of the fields of study. So the group that I brought together was to develop the course description and to add learning outcomes to the ACGM if they didn't exist, or in the case of BCIS 1305, 1405, that was a case of where they wanted to add some content and requested content, so they revised that particular course. And then, of course, the new courses they developed all together. The same in the social work, those courses had been in the ACGM, and social work was the last discipline that we approached or needed to approach for learning outcome study. There are still a lot of courses in the ACGM that don't have learning outcomes, but we had gone through all disciplines at that point, now that we've completed social work. So the process for the learning outcomes is a little different than a field of study or a regular advisory committee. This looks for faculty. We look for faculty in the discipline area and usually try to get around 12 individuals, 6 from community colleges and 6 from universities. And we do prep work. You don't just come here and have your expertise. You have to do prep work with this. And one of the requirements is that we look at syllabi from all over the state. I don't want to just see your syllabi from your institution. You need to be aware of what everyone else in the state in that discipline is doing. So the faculty that participate in this gather or given assignments based on what I can from university inventory, so that they can look at university inventories of courses. So we get that. And then I do want to hear from the community colleges as well. So we'll pick some all the community college members are to bring their syllabi, deposit their syllabi, and then some other community colleges as well. So we have, there can be 100 syllabi collected by the work group, and they review these ahead of time. This is all done ahead of the meeting. And then the meeting, we come together and look at enrollment trends and who's teaching this course, who's producing the graduates, and then their syllabi, and then let's build the learning outcomes from that. So it's not a where people come with their own agenda or their own syllabi, but it's where they've gotten a broader view of things. So these courses, we did get finished completely with the business area. We were able to get those completed, and that's what you see here. Those will go into the ACGM. And the social work. The ones for the psychology courses, they had more courses to do to begin with, because there were several existing courses in the ACGM in psychology that were put in the field of study for psychology that didn't have learning outcomes. So we not only did they have to do 2 new courses, they had to go back and do statistics and social. So that was the other 2 that they had to do besides the 2 new ones. So they had more courses. They also had a challenge in that we had to look at upper division courses to build some. We couldn't look at community colleges because they weren't offering those new courses. So we only could look at universities for those 2 new courses. And sometimes the universities seem to be more diverse in what they cover in a particular course. So we did not get finished with that. We're still in the process of kind of ironing out some of those learning outcomes. One for the existing course of social psychology seemed to have a lot of interest generated on that course, as well as abnormal during the comment period. Those were the 2 courses that probably got the most comments. And so I will be going back to the work group on those, and there's just a couple of items we will finish out. And once that's done, and I anticipate that will be done in time for these to be included in the spring ACGM. So do you have any questions about our process for that or where it goes from now?
The psychology group working in this semester?
I've been working with all the groups via email, and I will continue to work with them to, if based on comments, I will ask them, well, how do you want to revise this, or give me a suggestion that I can put forward to the rest of the group. If we, I don't think we'll have to have another meeting. That's an outside possibility, but I hope not.
Any other questions on the Learning Outcomes Project? All right, then moving on to the next item, we have the staff updates on coordinating board activities. And again, I'm going to turn to Rebecca first to give us a report on the status of the fields of study revisions and development.
Mainly, what I'm going to do here is refer you to the handout, and that gives you the status of where they are. And you can see that they've been very busy, and they continue to be busy in the spring as well. But a lot of work has been done. The second is the list of those that have been completed. And this is also a long process of, we have to get rules approved for the existence of a committee, and that has to go to the board. Then we have to get the board's approval of the members, and that will come later. You can't do it all at the same time. So we're talking, several months here, 2 quarters. And then they meet, and then they have a month of comment period, and then they have to work on those comments to finally bring. So this is almost a 9 to 12-month process in getting this from rules to the completed field of study curriculum. So it's not easy, and it's not quick. Also, if you have questions about the coordination of these fields of study, I've given you the contact information for Alan Mickey. He coordinates these committees. I also urge you to, for the committees that are coming up, your interested faculty, I think most of them, the two that have an asterisk by them, Natural Resources and Conservation and Research and Hospitality Administration, are coming up for call for nominations. If you have faculty in these areas that are interested, please encourage them, to have their nominations submitted. The participation of institutions cannot be overemphasized. This being a pluralistic kind of process, we need institutions to participate in that process, not just be unhappy with the results because they didn't participate. So it goes both ways. And some of those fields of study that will be meeting soon, make sure that your faculty are aware of that. They can follow the meetings on live streaming. And then when the comment period comes out, remind faculty to participate in that process as well. We need that feedback to go forward. That's all I have for field of study.
Yeah, let me just make a couple of comments about that. First of all, on participation, so by statute, we're restricted to 24 members for each committee. So, I mean, that's advisory committee law, if you will. And it, like the ACGM committee or UEAC committee, the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee, half of it is 2-year, half of it is 4-year. But there have been instances in which we have not gotten enough nominations from 4-year institutions to have 12 people on the committee. And there were at least 2 disciplines, I think it was math and history, where I know that all 37 general academic institutions offer a bachelor's degree in math and in history, and we did not get enough nominations from 4-year institutions to put 12 people on the committee. So if I only get 10 nominations from 4-year institutions, then I can only have 10 people from 2-year institutions on there, even if I get 30 nominations. So it really is important to make sure that your institutions are nominating folks for these things. We've been, and some of these don't take very, I mean, it's interesting. We've gone to a sort of 2-day format where we meet in the afternoon, typically in the afternoon one day, in the morning the next day. And we started off with a format of where we met all day and then met again if we needed to. And so some committees need to meet again, some don't. Engineering met for 2 years, and I forget how many committee meetings they had, but part of that's because we were trying to do too much with one committee, frankly. But we've learned our lesson with that one, and so we're going to try to fix that going forward as best we can, at any rate. The interesting thing about the new format is that the afternoon is usually devoted to a lot of angst about how my institution does it this way, and since we do it this way, it must be the right way, because after all, we wouldn't do it unless it was the right way to do it. Ergo, if somebody else is doing it differently, then they must be doing it wrong, because after all, we wouldn't do it if it wasn't being done the right way. That comes from both 2-year and 4-year institutions, by the way. This is not something that just afflicts only the senior universities. It also afflicts the community colleges as well. But it's interesting that a lot of the afternoon is devoted to a lot of discussion about why no one should be asked to do anything different than they're doing. It's all about maintenance of the status quo as a general rule, and a lot of discussion about things like academic freedom, which doesn't touch on these issues at all, by the way, and also issues of accreditation sometimes, and other things, and which are important issues. But it sort of allows, but it's interesting to me that the afternoon can be devoted to getting all that out. And the next morning, I guess after people have slept on it some or something, they tend to be much more cooperative, if you will, in a way. And it really is that, I mean, this is sort of human beings doing what human beings do. Okay, and I get all this. I've served on a lot of committees in my time, and I know how these, you always have to devote some time to letting everybody vent whatever their frustrations or their hopes and desires are that they bring to the table. And then you can sort of get down to business, if you will. But it has been difficult because we're asking institutions to do something and operate in a way that in Texas we are simply not used to operating that way. And when I was asked by the Senate Finance Committee why transfer is so hard, I said, well, it's because you have a 100+ year tradition in this state of every institution doing whatever it wants to do. And that is not only true, I mean, and that's true within our systems as well, okay? And so we have 61 systems in this state. None of them ever really act like a system in many respects. And that's a part of the culture. It's a part of the heritage that we have. Good, bad, or right or wrong, that's a part of where the state comes from. Individualism and all that stuff, and it's just as embedded in higher education as it is in any other institution culture in the state. So it's very difficult for people then to get past that normal way of operating and move to a place where we're trying to do this much more collaboratively on a statewide basis. It is very difficult, and I get that. I was a faculty member for a lot of years, so I understand how it's hard to give that up. I mean, it's hard for any of us to give up any individual prerogative we have and give that over to a group. That's just hard business. And so I've been very appreciative in a lot of ways of the committees, of the angst that they go through, but also of their ability to arrive at some consensus and some decision at the end of this as well. So in a lot of ways, it's been very gratifying to watch. But make sure that people nominate. We have been under a lot of pressure to try to get the top 25 transfer majors done by the beginning of this next legislative session, which is about, a month and 5 days away or whatever. Something like, it starts January 8th or something like that, I think. So we're very close to the start of the next legislative session. We will have almost met our goal of the top 25. I think we'll have 29. Should have about 29 approved by then, some of which are not in the top 25, by the way. Mexican-American Studies, for example, which is one that the field actually asked us to convene a committee on and do. So we have some that are not in the top 25, but we'll almost reach our goal. But one of the good things about reaching our goal is that hopefully we'll be able to slow our pace down a little bit and make sure that there's a little bit more deliberation in this. Right now, once a committee decides on the courses it wants in the field of study, then typically they go out for public comment. They come back, the comments come back, those comments then are reviewed by the committee, and the committee makes a decision on whether to meet again or not. Going forward, we're going to have the committee meet again regardless. And I think that should help the dialogue a lot going forward. I mean, and I suppose if it ever happens that comments go out and come back with no comment, or every comment is positive, and I sort of dream about that happening someday, but I'm pretty sure it won't. But you never know. We go through 3 or 4 rounds of this, and then at some point in the future, this will be the way it's always been done. Nobody will think about it anymore. So maybe at that point, something like that might happen. I won't be around to see it, I'm sure. Not only because I could very well be dead by then, but I certainly hope to be retired by then, at any rate. But it has been an interesting process, and so we will have committee meetings again after the public comment period. So we'll probably bring back people in to meet face-to-face again, unless there's just sort of widespread consensus on it where nobody thinks it's really necessary. But and we're going to make sure that things are reviewed on a 5-year basis, as I said, at a minimum. And then if we need to bring back folks to look at it beforehand, we will. But do pay attention to the nominations that come out. Make sure you get people nominated, and then make sure that your institutions are paying attention to the comment period, because that's the kind of feedback that we need to make sure that we get these as right as we can.
Thank you, Rex. Thank you, Rex. And again, I just want to reiterate the importance of really having a representative from your institutions nominated. I know that we make it a point to nominate every opportunity that we have. We don't always get selected, but we make sure that at least our institution is represented in the nominations. Also, it's also very important to send out the comments to the faculty that it's going to affect. Again, we try to make sure that that information does get out to the appropriate faculty, because again, those comments are revisited once they get here to the coordinating board, and again, it gives all of our faculty the opportunity to really voice their opinion regarding these fields of study. So again, I also want to reiterate the importance of making sure your institution is represented, or at least submits a nomination. Rebecca?
I just wanted to comment. This information is sent to your chief academic officer, but also the liaisons. So if you think you're not hearing about things, contact those offices to express your interest. They may not know of your interest. And if you're not aware of who your liaisons are, we can let you know, or certainly some administrative office at your institution should be able to let you know who the THECB liaison at your institution, and that's at community colleges and universities have liaisons too.
And it also goes now to your reporting officials and to your registrars as well. And there's an update that comes out every quarter. I have yet to get the update out from October, but maybe before the January board meeting, I'll get that one out. There's a paragraph I need to revise. But we try to send out one every quarter, and it goes to, as Rebecca said, goes to all the CAOs, but it also goes to chancellors and presidents and registrars and reporting officials and liaisons. So,
Hey, Dr. Peoples, on the chart on agenda item 10B, where we have all of the field of studies and it shows the board approval date, will that date be when they were last reviewed, or will you add a column for a review date? Because, we've got 3 out there that are about 15 years old. The communications and the engineering technology.
Communications is going to meet again in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Actually, next week. A week from Friday, communications will meet, and computer science has already been underway. And what's the other one?
Engineering tech.
Technology.
And that one is scheduled, I think, for sometime in the spring.
Okay. So will those dates, though, we all add a column to show like when they were last reviewed and?
Yeah, and we'll probably add something to that either last board approval date, because once a new one is approved, the old one then goes away. So yeah, we'll fix that somehow that reflects that.
And
good point.
And just one last question, and I know that this kind of came up, and I know that we passed this on to the executive committee for TACRO, but that there are several of the fields of studies that have overlapping courses, and that if we're going to have to transcript them and receive them, I don't know how you're going to know which field of study they were applicable to, to have the force of law behind it.
Right.
And I just didn't know if that had come up in the committee work.
Yes, it's come up quite often, and in fact, at the last TACRO meeting that I was at, I did a session on field of study, and it turns out that sitting right in front of me was the newly elected chair or president. Yeah, I started to say whatever title they carry, president-elect. Well, yeah, but he was president, I think. Then I think as of that afternoon, he would be president. Yeah, he's president now. So, yeah. But at that time of the morning, he was still president-elect, I guess, and then in the afternoon, he became president. So, the inauguration had to take place and all that stuff. But anyway, so he and I had a conversation about this, and because I know that the transcripting piece of this is, in the long run, is going to be terribly important so that everybody knows who's got what, so to speak. And so he was going to set up some kind of ad hoc committee or something to go to work on this, and so we're going to work with them. I don't know how many of you were around when the core curriculum first came around, and whenever that was, so a long time ago. But anyway, I've been around long enough to remember that. And TACRO was very instrumental then in establishing the nomenclature that we use, the 010 and 020 and so forth, the nomenclature we use for identifying core curriculum. So when I talked to him, I said, so, we want you to help identify a nomenclature that'll work for field of study as well, so that everybody can transcript it in the same way, and the sending institutions and receiving institutions will all know which courses belong to which one and what the intent is. So we're working on that.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Going back to the dates, probably the date that would be good is the effective date of when it begins. I know most of them are the fall, but it would be good if that's on the chart.
But we'll put up, we have one somewhere, I think, that has an implementation date, and if we don't, we'll make sure that there is one. And the implementation occurs a full year to a year and a half after approval. So I think if it's approved in the fall, it's sort of slated for the next fall. Part of the, hopefully what TACRO will also help us discover is whether that's really ample time or not. But if it's approved in the spring, then it would be a year and a half later. So one approved in the spring of 19, for example, wouldn't go into effect until the fall of 20. So we're trying to make sure there's enough lead time to get everything in the works, so to speak. But if anybody sees any issues with that, then you know let us know, and we'll work out what we need to on those things.
I think that's particularly important for the learning outcomes. If they're creating new courses, that gives us a little bit of time to.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, continue with the agenda item. Then we have some other activities of the coordinating board that are going to be discussed by Dr. Peebles. And for those of you who may not know, he is the Assistant Commissioner for Academic Quality and Workforce. Rex?
I was just wondering if this was available in the e-update, some of the information that you were talking about, or if it was available someplace online, so I could look for it instead of having to wait for it to filter down.
Oh, the field of study?
Yeah, that information.
Yeah, if you go to, there's, all of that is available on our website. And if you go to, you can either go to university, you go to, I forget, we got a new website, so I forget exactly what these headings are. But if you find universities or community colleges, and you look under it, and there's a menu there, and transfer resources is one of the items on the menu. And if you click on transfer resources, then it will take you to things like the ACGM field of study. And then it will give you the full. Yeah, go to the main page. Then you can go to it. Okay. But that's how you would find it, through the main page. Okay. And I'll show you when we get done here. Okay, so let me talk about whatever it is I was supposed to talk about. Is transfer one of those?
Activities of the coordinating board.
Oh, activities of the coordinating board. Well, oh, that kind of stuff. So So we have a Christmas party planned? All right, I hope. Or somebody's supposed to be planning one anyway. Holiday party, let me correct myself. So I think that for us, probably the biggest thing looming for us is going to be the legislative session, which, takes all the oxygen out of the room otherwise. It's very busy. One of the things that the coordinating board gets to do is analyze legislation that comes through. And so if it touches on higher education, then it comes to us for analysis. And most legislation winds up in my division. So I think we reviewed 400 to 500 bills in the last legislative session. I think it was over 400 that we analyzed and sent back to the legislature. Sometimes more than once, because every time it goes through an iteration at the legislature, it comes back to us for analysis, because things may change or they may not, and so forth. One of the things that I was really surprised at, I've been here 5 years and 2 days now. So I was reminded of somebody. I got an email yesterday telling me I could get my 5-year PN or whatever at the next agency staff meeting, which I won't be at. So I thought somehow that was all fitting. But one of the things that I was surprised at is how much attention the legislators actually pay to the analysis. I mean, it's interesting to me that now, I don't know how much attention the legislators are paying, but their staff pay a lot of attention to this stuff. And they're the ones they're writing this stuff and making it up. So, but it's interesting to me how often they will call back and say, you know, you said in your analysis that so-and-so isn't going to work. Why not? And if that's not going to work, then what will work? So a lot of times it's a very practical thing. I try as much as possible to keep the institutions in mind. And sometimes it's a simple matter of, you know, they want to pass it on September 1 and they want it due then on October 1. And that's just not possible. Like, well, that's just not going to happen because it can't. And what's a reasonable timeline and that kind of thing. So sometimes it's very simple stuff. Sometimes it's much more substantive. But that'll keep us very busy. I think two of the biggest issues that will affect the work of this committee in particular will be, I think, transfer will be another big issue. We received the other day the recommendations from the Senate Higher Education Committee from its interim charges. And one of the things that they had on their list is the fields of study, full implementation of fields of study, that kind of thing. So they're very interested in the transfer issue. You know, they get a lot of comments from their constituents about it, and they never get a positive comment about it as a general rule. Okay, I mean, nobody ever calls up their representative or senator and talks about what a great job, you know, UT San Antonio is doing. Now they'll call up and tell them what a lousy job UT San Antonio is doing, but you know, it's like a lot of other things, right? What you hear is the negative, you don't really hear much about the positive. And so even though the positive may be overwhelming the negative, that doesn't matter if all they hear is the negative. But they get a lot of negative comments about transfer. We know that students in Texas graduate with a lot of excess hours. And we haven't even begun to really analyze the students who don't graduate. And it's one of the reasons they don't graduate is because they have too many excess hours. They've run out of time, they've run out of financial aid, they've run out of willpower, you know, whatever it may be to get there. So we're starting to look at how we can try to get some information on that phenomenon. But I do think transfer is going to be a major issue again, and it will affect two things. One is it will affect the field of study and the programs of study that we're also developing for Associate of Applied Science degrees, but it will also affect, I think, core curriculum. So there was a lot of discussion in the last legislative session about core curriculum and about how it's being used or not used. It was originally conceived of as a transfer device. And what we all know is that while everything transfers, not everything applies. But typically when the legislature says they want it to transfer, they also mean they want it to apply. And they don't make the distinction that we make at an institution between we'll accept it in transfer, but we may or may not apply it to your degree. And that's often for good reason, by the way. I mean, there are really solid reasons sometimes why you don't apply students' course to a particular degree program they want, because it's not something they need for it. So we have to be careful that the legislature understands that the distinction between the two, and that making sure that courses that you're going to apply to a degree program really are those necessary for the degree program, that's always kept in it's always kept in view somewhere. But they tend to conflate the two things. And so, you know, they while they understand the core curriculum as a transfer device, they don't always understand why it doesn't apply. So, you know, and it applies to the core, but it may not apply to your major. And so let me, well, one thing about this, theoretically, it is quite possible for a student to finish a 42-hour core curriculum at Institution A, transfer to Institution B, and only 12 hours of that actually apply to their degree. And that would be the 12 hours of American government and the 12 hours of American history as mandated by the legislature in the 1930s. So there are issues there about having this transfer device that doesn't really transfer, at least in the mind. So there may very well be some work done with consultation of UEAC and their help and so forth, and staff work. We have made some moves, I think, to try to make the core curriculum not only more transfer friendly, but also more applicability friendly as well. But I think those two things will be significant issues that will impact the work of the ACGM. I think dual credit will also be, or could be, a significant issue as well in the coming legislative session, because there's a lot of dual credit out there, as we all know, and it is growing. It's not getting any less. It leveled off for about a year, and then it started growing back again. And I think part of that is you had this significant growth after the passage of 505, which took any restrictions. The coordinating board had before that had restrictions on number of hours that students could take and at what grade level, and those restrictions were moved. We can't have rules about that anymore. Institutions can have all the rules they want to, but we can't. And so that created a huge spike in dual credit enrollment, and I think that it sort of climbed up hastily, and then it leveled off a bit while people kind of took a breath and got used to it, and now it started climbing again. And I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think by and large it's probably positive. I know I'm not sure what it says about, as I've often remarked to other people, if we really and truly believe that a student can come out of the 8th grade and be prepared to go to college in the 9th grade, then we have either done something really remarkable to K through 8, or we've done something equally remarkable to college. And you can decide for yourself where the positive and where the negative of that may be. But I think it's something worth thinking about where all this leads us in the end. But we do know that for most students who take dual credit, the results have been okay. They usually move on. Their chances of going to college are greater. Their chances of going on to college or going on to college after high school are greater. They're already in college if they're in dual credit, but going on to college after high school, there's a greater likelihood of that if they were in dual credit. Early college high school system and its variations seems to work really well, mainly because students get a lot of support in those that they don't get in sort of traditional dual credit or regular dual credit or whatever you want to call it. And we know that students who go on tend to do as well or better than native students do. Now, that may be some self-selection, in that dual credit has tended to take the students who were probably going to go to college anyway and who were probably going to succeed in college anyway. They just started it quicker than they would have otherwise. But we're reaching further and further down, if you will, into the high school population. And so how does that affect it? We also know, we think we have a pretty good idea now that if you're college ready by some measure, and what they looked at in the AIR study anyway, looked at 8th grade test, and if you're college ready, then you tend to do well in dual credit. And if you're not college ready, you don't tend to do well in dual credit. Now, this should surprise no one. Right? This is the result we should expect in some ways from this. But I think it does point out that if we're going to make dual credit available, we need to make sure that students who take dual credit have been deemed college ready somehow. And they don't necessarily have to be college ready right now. And I'm talking about academic dual credit, not CTE dual credit necessarily. And so I think part of our legislative recommendation will be to ensure that if a student wants to take academic dual credit, they have demonstrated college readiness, in some way, either through a SAT, a ACT, a TSIA score, and so forth. And so I think dual credit will be there, especially the funding of it. This is something that this committee rarely, if ever, gets into is funding issues. But if you're from a community college, and you've been in one for a while, then you know that dual credit has changed the business model for a community college. When you get up there where dual credit's 20% of your enrollment or more, and the actual number is probably lower than that, then it's hard to figure out how to do without it. But how do you do with it then becomes a real issue. And so I think funding of this will become more, and what part of the AIR study, I think, that has not been near enough attention paid to is the cost part of it. That looked at the whole issue of how is this delivered, and then how is that then paid for given that delivery. You know, so it's different if it's on a college campus taught by college faculty from if it's on a high school campus taught by high school faculty. Now, they may have the same credentials requirements through SACs, and everybody may meet those, but the funding piece of it and the cost piece of it is very different under those two scenarios. And so, I mean, I think this is one of the things the legislature over time is going to have to try to figure out is how do they adequately fund this? And, you know, and that sort of goes into the whole issue of how do they adequately fund higher education, period, much less just dual credit. And, you know, we have issues there with increasing debt of students, so I think that'll also be another piece of this. Performance funding for four-year institutions will probably come up again in some way or fashion. There's a lot of interest in it. The legislature can't agree on how to do this. And so that's kind of kept it off the table up to now, but if they can ever agree on how to do it, then I think you'll see it happen in some form. And so, you know, it'd be best to try to guide that as best we can, and give them at least some sense of how this might work and what would be the better way to do this, if there is one. But I think that's another issue that will also be a part of the mix for next time around. We're going to revise our FOS process a little bit, as I said, because we do want to make sure that this is done as well as it can be done. You know, otherwise we'll be working on dual credit issues. I think to a great extent, the funding issue I think will be a big piece of this, and I'm sure the transfer will also come back. Anything else you want me to talk about?
You mentioned the air study. We also have these two studies that are available online if anyone's interested.
Yeah. So we have our annual transfer study that comes out, which is this one, which I think is
That's just the narrative, it's not the full thing.
yeah. Now the full study is 500 pages long, so I have yet to read the full study myself, but because it includes all of the narratives that come from each of the institutions about best practices, but they're gleaned. But we go through that and look at this stuff, and so I think this has got some pretty interesting stuff in it about how transfer works and doesn't work, and who does and doesn't. And then one of the things we were directed in the last legislative session to do was conduct a study of transfer with a particular focus on dual credit, but also look at articulation agreements. And for me, I found looking at the articulation agreements to be very interesting. Given the number of institutions and the number of majors we have in this state, we have a surprisingly low number of articulation agreements. But I understand that. I worked on articulation agreements for a long time as a dean and a vice president, and I know it is hard, it's painstaking, it's time-consuming, it's just difficult work. And about the time you get one finished, and you know, some faculty member somewhere says, well, you know, we really need to be teaching thermodynamics or something, you know, or we don't really need to be teaching thermodynamics, as the case may be, right? And so then everything changes, and then you got to go back and redo all this crap one more time, okay? But, you know, articulation agreements vary from the very good in a lot of ways to the ones that are virtually meaningless. That basically, after 10 pages of stuff, essentially says, if you send your institutions to our institution and they're qualified to get in, we'll take them. Which is pretty much the message that every institution sends to the whole world. So I put that in an articulation agreement, but that's really what they amount to. And I understand why, by the way. I mean, I don't really say this in a super critical manner or anything. I understand why we wind up that way, because it's so hard to get these things done. It's very difficult. So anyway, these two studies, I think, have some really interesting information in them. If nothing else, they're available on the website. You take a look at those. One is under Senate Bill 802, which directed us to do the study on transfer. And, you know, and the part about dual credit, it actually, our study on this confirmed the AIR study, and that is that if you know, if you're college ready, it's good. And also, the more dual credit you take, the more excess hours you tend to build up. So part of what conversations around dual credit have been about is, so what's the sweet spot? You know, how many hours is enough? Is enough to give a student a feel for college, get them a little head start, but it's not so much that they begin to lose hours. And it seems that that sweet spot is probably, I don't really know what it is, but it appears to be somewhere around 12 to 15 hours, because below that, students don't tend to lose much credit, if any, and the higher they go up, the more credit they tend to lose, and which really makes some sense in a lot of ways, if you think about it, and particularly given the high school incentives to take dual credit courses because your GPA is weighted higher. And so for a lot of students, well, I don't care whether it transfers or not. I'm trying to get in that top 10%. So, you know, if it transfers, that's great. If it doesn't, that's great too. I'm just trying to get to the top of the heap here, and so I'm going to take this. So, you know, you have incentives that are built in that really have nothing to do with the issue of whether they're going to apply or not. So as long as you have that, then there's going to be some controversy there. And of course, these two studies, I think, also once again demonstrate how terribly important advising is. But, you know, I was at a meeting the other day, and this guy said that the recommended ratio of students to advisors at a college, I think he said it was 300 to 1, which really struck me as kind of high nevertheless. I thought 300 to 1, well, that's even, but I would be willing to bet that most of your institutions, your ratio is a lot higher than that. That if you could get down to 300 to 1, you'd feel pretty good. And, you know, and I get this, it's a resource issue. You know, how many can you, you got to balance that against all the other needs that an institution has. So it's a difficult thing. But again, it iterates that advising is very important.
One comment about the transfer study. In the survey this year, we asked universities, it deals with general academic institutions, so it's the universities, and we ask how much they use the Texas Common Course numbering system, which certainly relates directly to what we do. And so there are some breakouts by institution of how many Texas Common Courses they put in their core, how many they put in their major, how many non-common courses do they have at the lower division, which may be an interesting thing to review, see how institutions stack up there.
Rex, I just have a question. Since you talked about the legislative session, the next one, will you be reviewing the bill that's trying to revise the UT and Texas A&M game?
It'll probably wind up in my division. Yeah, that'll be a tough one. I mean, you know, on a personal level, I could actually care less probably. Although for a long time it was a really good rivalry in a lot of ways. So, yeah, we'll probably wind up with that one. We wind up with all those obscure little things.
I just thought I'd add a little bit of humor. Let's go to any questions for Rex or for Rebecca at this point on what we just discussed for item 10. All right, so then moving on to item 11 is discussion of future work and meeting dates. I believe all of you have the next meeting date, which is set for Tuesday, May the 7th, 2019. Again, I just urge you to, when you receive the email asking if you're going to be present, would you please respond and confirm your attendance. That's important because we need to confirm that we're going to have a quorum. So if you could keep that in mind. The other thing, I want to also remind you to complete the travel expense for attendance form. All of you have that. So before you leave, if you could complete that, and you can leave it on the table, and somebody will come by and pick it up. In reference to our next agenda, what we'll be looking at is a review of courses with enrollment data. We'll do the annual review of courses with enrollment data, which we talked about earlier in terms of which courses we want to recommend for deletion. So we'll go over that. We'll go over again the speech course, look at the information that's provided regarding that, and then we'll look at, there's been also someone's contacted Rebecca in reference to maybe adding some new courses. So we'll probably look at that if it does move forward. Aside from that, I think anything else that might develop prior to that meeting will probably end up on the agenda. Rebecca, do you have any comments?
No, I think that kind of tops what we're planning to do, and we'll do the follow-up for all the things that we talked about on the speech rubric, and that will be a part of the discussion at that time, too.
Any other comments or questions from the members?
I just wanted to clarify the travel form is your best estimate, and you're not getting reimbursement from us. Your institution, when they nominated you, promised to pay your way. This is just informational in that we collect this information and provide it to the board. They want to know how much these committee meetings cost. Even though we're not paying it out of our budget, somebody is paying for this. So just your best estimate of what you did and your mileage today. And if you can't get it to me, I can send you an electronic copy, and then you can send it back. But if you have this kind of information today, just leave this form with me.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Anything else? So do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting? Second?
Second.
All right, the meeting is adjourned at 1:35. Thank you.